And looks like we're live.
Huzzah!
Welcome everybody to another Drupal and Coffee, a show where we spend about 2 hours in a night to nerd out about some kind of Drupal topic. We've had a number of great shows. Last show, we've had a lot of viewers. We talked to a lot number of craft developers about the CMS craft. Um, and we had an excellent deep dive going through the anatomy of craft and all of the great things that it's good for. Um, Tonight, we're going to be talking to a local Drupal developer, Marc Drummond. Uh, Hello, Marc. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm very good. How about you? It's
Uh,
early.
it's early. I just am feeling the gigantic ball of nervousness, stress, and excitement that is building, like has been building for months, and is going to just totally explode out next week when we're at DrupalCon.
Yeah, but then you just get out some beignets and.
I don't know what that is, but that sounds
You don't
okay.
know what a beignet is?
I do not
Well, we
know.
need to have some beignets when we are in New Orleans. I've
You're
never been to
just
New
making words
Orleans.
up at this point.
I am not making up words. So, beignets are these little puff pastry donuts. They're like air with. They're just like a piece of magic, and so we gotta have some while we're down there. I'm not a big
Sounds
donut
good.
person, but beignets are the right stuff.
With us, as always, is Lowell Johnson. Hello, Lowell.
Hello, world.
How you doing tonight, Lowell?
I'm doing fine.
All right. Well, the focus of this show, as you can see from this checklist, is we're going to be talking about pattern labs and components. We're going to be talking about the pattern lab system for representing components. Marc is um, well known to me, at least, as someone who knows a lot about pattern labs. You're the very first person to have shown me pattern labs, and we've worked with it quite a bit on some of the things we've done together. And it's a great way to start talking about components in general because there's a lot of activity going on today about components, and be getting into that. But mostly, we'll be having fun tonight, as we usually do when we get together. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be getting into it tonight. Just prepare for about 2 hours of front-end nerd fun. Um,
Emphasis on fun.
Probably, but since I'm involved, the emphasis will probably be on the nerd part.
Well, both of those can live happily together.
Yes. So, Marc, we wanted to kick off the show by just jumping right into Pattern Labs. We were looking at a number of links
Yeah.
about Pattern Labs. Did you want to share a screen that looked at patternlabs.io, I believe? And then we could talk
Yeah.
about,
Why don't we start talking?
and we could do a what is.
Pattern Lab.
There we
Yeah.
go.
So Pattern Lab
And it looks like the
is
screen that you're currently sharing could be
not the thing I'm supposed to be sharing.
a Slack,
Make that go
or
away.
maybe it's Twitter. There we go.
All right, let's retry this. We're doing this live.
There we go.
Everything is going to work splendidly.
There we go. I've focused the screen on you and what you're sharing.
Okay,
And
cool.
I currently see the patternlab.io.
Nice. All right, so Pattern Lab. So Pattern Lab is a tool that I've been pretty excited about using in projects. And I think it's really neat, so I wanted to talk about it. I'm a front-end developer. I'm not sure if you mentioned that or not. So I'm a front-end developer, and I work primarily with Drupal. I work at Lullabot, and so I've been able to make Pattern Lab, used Pattern Lab on a couple of our projects and found it to be really useful. So what the heck is Pattern Lab? Okay, so Pattern Lab can be used for both prototyping and for use as kind of like a style guide, a inventory of all the different parts of your website. And it's probably easier to kind of show a demo and then kind of walk backwards and talk a little bit about the theory behind it. So this is what Pattern Lab is. And
so we're seeing like a nice ordered list, kind of an effort to organize the many things that you would use on a website. Oh, and look, like you can.
So yeah, so you can narrow down and you can look at just one thing. You can see here's the colors that we're using on our website. Here are the fonts that we're using on the website. You can show a chunk of different things that you're using. You can show here's how we're handling lists. And then you can get into some more complicated things, like here's one little piece of our website. We have a byline that has an author name that you would use in like an article, right?
So is the idea that as for a project that is large enough to warrant the extra effort to build something like this out, that you would just we're jumping to an actual page.
So maybe it's easier to like walk backwards.
Sure.
Okay. So you have a website that you are putting together, you are maintaining, whatever. It has a lot of little bits to it, right? Like you could have all of your styles and think about this as one giant thing, or you can break this down into chunks, right? So if you look at this page, there's several chunks. So here's a sidebar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my mouse when I move that around?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you got like kind of a main section here. You have a header. And you've got some comments down here, right? And so here we're looking at the page as a whole, which is handy. But you can also, like, what if we wanted to just see that header on its own, right? So that's one chunk of the page that we might be working on. Which a lot of times gets called a component, which is basically one chunk of the page. And within that chunk, that section, that component section, you might have a smaller part, right? So you might have your primary navigation, right? That's a smaller chunk of the page. And then you might even go a little bit smaller and say, like these little buttons, right? Your button might be a part of, let's say there's a search button or something.
And every time you click on one of those things, it's just having a new like URL query for it, and so it seems like this is almost like a website in itself that's able to understand those query parameters and deliver.
Yeah. So this lets you see your site as a whole, and then you can drill down and see all the individual chunks of it. So,
but it seems like if you're going to drill down to see a chunk of it, you need to know what it is. Is it an atom? Is it a molecule? Is it an organism?
Yeah. So we'll kind of circle back to that. I just want to like point out a little bit.
Gotcha.
So that's neat, right? That's a neat tool. One of my other things that I care a lot about is responsive web design, right? Like, how do we make our websites look great on small phones and big giant desktop screens and all that sort of thing? So a lot of times when we're working on that, how many times have you like, all right, I'm going to drag my browser around, right? I'm going to change this, and then I'll kind of get a sense of what it looks at small and large. One of the things I like is that it's got this toolbar that lets you change right within the interface without resizing your browser. And you can pick different sizes. You can type in specifically and say, all right, if my browser is 1200 pixels wide, how is this going to look? How about at 500 pixels wide? And you can get an idea. If you want to just make it as big as your monitor, you can click the full button. You can click a random size. Yeah, so this is like helpful so that you can sort of test to make sure that your content, the nice thing is that you can put sample content in here and you can test things out and see how does this work with different amounts of characters. My favorite button is disco mode, which randomly changes the size. I think that's kind of fun.
It's a little bit of lag, so it's a little janky.
All right, well, sorry, I'm going to turn that off. You can pick media queries based on M's. That's kind of neat. You can search for a pattern. So if you know that you've got a header
that's
pattern, you can search for that.
Okay, yeah.
You can turn on documentation. You can integrate documentation with this.
What kind of documentation?
Well, you can see, all right, this logo. There's a masthead, there's a logo, there's navigation.
So does it figure out what are all
you can show what the code is.
Oh, that's good. I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about like where this fits within the normal development workflow.
Right.
And it appears that it fits kind of like in the front end to back end developer handoff, where perhaps it's a big enough project where you start working on the front end markup before you are ready to integrate those components into the back-end development process.
That's definitely one usage. I've used it in that sense a lot of times. It's great because you can put together something where, as you're prototyping, right, as you're exploring and trying to implement the designs the designer has come up with, and you're collaborating with the designer to do those implementations, you don't have to, depending on like how you have your setup, you can have something like this so that you can share these bits of content with people and have them take a look at it without somebody having to potentially you can like export these as some static files and put them on a server somewhere so that you don't have to have somebody build something on their local and test things out, and which is kind of like a whole other thing, and there's tools for that too. But
at MidCamp, I was introduced to a very interesting idea, and that's what if we flipped that process on its head? Whereas if we have front-end developers always working on the actual CSS for the site, but we require them to put in whatever work they need to put in so that these comments are properly made. And that's what we drive the style guide or the pattern lab off of.
Right. So I think we can get into that a little bit later.
Cool.
So to continue on, so the like prototyping thing, that's one aspect of this. The other part is particularly if you have a long-running project, and there's going to be a diverse number of people that are working on that project, and people might be coming into the project and leaving the project. Having good documentation about what the heck is going on with this project is really, really helpful. Documentation is great, right? So this is like front-end documentation. And there's been lots of people who've talked about this concept. Susan Robertson, Anna Debenham, a lot of really good resources out there. You can find there's some really good articles on A List Apart. There's some, Anna wrote a really good book with on style guides. There's some good posts on 24 ways. So style guides have been a big topic over the last years, and one of the aspects is how do you have that as a living style guide? How do you have that as something that you incorporate into your project as your project continues on?
Right, not just once,
not just once, and it's really challenging because you want to make sure that you're using your real CSS. You want to make sure you're using your real JavaScript, and most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly,
when you say using your real CSS and real JavaScript,
production,
not just creating the CSS and JavaScript for the style guide and then, having to recreate it or
in a different system,
or have it like evolve separately from the style guide.
Yeah, and I mean that's certainly so. There's certainly Pattern Lab could be used as, and I've used this on a project where I just worked in Pattern Lab the whole time. I implemented a design of a site in Pattern Lab, and then that got handed off to developers who used it as like the documentation. The backend developers are like, okay, here's our markup and our CSS and our JavaScript, and here's our starting point for how we do the integration. And I didn't have to worry about that. That's certainly, you kind of like throw it over the transom. But, there might be projects where you want to keep this going for a long time because it's a helpful tool. But if you have the same CSS files that are used for your production website as in the style guide, you're going to have less chances for discrepancy. If you have the same JavaScript, if you have the same images, as much as you can, and those are fairly doable things. The biggest challenge is how do you do that with markup? And we'll kind of like get into some of the challenges with that. But how do you keep that in sync? How do you keep the, whatever templating system that you're using with your content management system, with your app, with whatever you're doing, with the markup that you're using for Pattern Lab? That could be a really big challenge, but it's sort of like the holy grail, because if you did that, then you'd have a really good way to have living documentation for your project. And that's not a challenge just for Pattern Lab. There's a lot of other systems, and this gets back to what you were talking about. Right. So the other style that we'll get into like showing how Pattern Lab actually works, but Pattern Lab has markup in template files, and that's cool. There is also a style guide that tends to have the documentation right within the Sass partials that you're using. So Sass files, is where you have your CSS.
Sass partials? What's a Sass partial?
All right, so let's walk this back. So Sass, syntactically awesome style sheets. That's a way that you can write CSS with some kind of programming aspects of it, and you can break instead of having one big giant CSS file, you can break them up into little bits. Just as we showed how the style guide, you can look at the whole thing, or you can look at individual bits. With Sass, a really kind of common practice is you'll have one file for each kind of chunk on the page. Sometimes that's at least one style, and that Sass file for an individual chunk is called a Sass partial. So, and there'll be a certain set of CSS rules that are within that file, and so one style of documentation is you put the markup at the top of that file, which can be really handy because then somebody who goes to work on that file has the markup padding immediately there and they can see it. You still have the challenge with that of that's not the markup probably that's used to create your actual production markup on your website. So in some way you have to keep that in sync. You have to remember that if I make a change in my website's template file, I also need to make it in the Sass file, or I need to make it in the Pattern Lab file.
And that's not dry.
Right, and it's My experience is that when you get into a project and you're getting towards, you have however long you're going to be working on getting this project up and running, right? You have scope. You have, here's the set of things that we need to get done. And it's always challenging. Things take longer than you expect a lot of times. And we've got to get a website up, and we need to, try to meet our deadlines as best as possible. So something like keeping your style guide up to date is something that's, when you push comes to shove and you have to make a decision of, do we launch this website or do we keep our style guide up to date, that can often be left to the side. So trying to find a mechanism, if we think style guides are an important thing, and I do, finding a mechanism to keep this dry, to keep the code in one place rather than in two places is really key, in my opinion.
Cool.
So that's the demo. That's like a quick demo of Pattern Lab.
Cool. So what is this page trying to communicate? This little diagram with the fancy atoms, molecules, and organisms.
So I want to first give a huge shout out to Dave Olson, who's been Pattern Lab's an open source project, and a number of people have contributed to it. Dave Olson has been the lead person who's made this happen, who's made this a reality, who got this project started and does a lot of work to keep it running, and it's a really cool project. He worked with Brad Frost, who's an awesome speaker and great guy in the front-end world. And Brad has sort of conceptualized this atomic design thing that I'm going to talk about, sort of underlies Pattern Lab, and then worked with Dave, and between the two of them, they made this a reality. And so a huge shout out to them, first of all, for making this great tool, which has become really important in how I work. Props. Respect. So atomic design, what the heck is that? So if you look back at our demo, you might have seen these goofy words at the top. Not super goofy, but
nerdy.
Atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages are not super nerdy.
Bringing it back to chemistry.
Right. So this is a way to conceptualize of this notion of we have big parts of the page and we have smaller parts of the page, right?
Atoms being the lowest as far as you can reduce structure.
Yeah.
Atomic structure.
As you know, you can go down to protons and neutrons and electrons, and you can go down to
Let's not split
a
electrons.
quantum level. You can have, up quarks and down quarks and charm quarks, and then you can get muons and gluons. And have I gone too far afield?
The nerd factor
you could
is
stop me?
here, yes. I'm going to have to stop it right there.
Cut me off.
You go any further, you'll find Ant-Man.
No. I'll be lost forever in the quantum space. So atoms, we're going to say that atoms are the smallest piece.
Okay, let's just say that.
So an atom, what is an atom? So atoms are sometimes, like a color is not necessarily like a chunk of the page, but it's a concept of, here's one element of our design, right? It's a color. Headings. So atoms tend to be more like raw markup, raw HTML elements. Lists, for example. Right? Here's the styles for a list. Here's the style for a text input in a form, for a button, for a table. So that's one piece, right?
Yes.
Then you have molecules, which is what happens if I put more than one atom together. So we're like a little more conceptually very small part, very small component. So let's look at forms, right? So a molecule here has has different form elements in it. It consists of atoms, and yeah, so it's a search form. So that's one molecule, and that molecule can then appear in like a header, right? So this, well, I guess it's not appearing as. Oh, right. If I zoom out, you have a search form here, and if you were to look into here, you have a search molecule. Here's this code, right? This is how it's using the mustache syntax, which is a templating language. So, so you have a molecule for, well, I don't know, it's in here somewhere. Forms, search, you have a search form, right? I guess we just kind of looked at that. So the search molecule gets used in the header organism, but in theory it could be used in another organism as well. It's a markup pattern. And then that header organism gets used can be used in multiple templates, right? It's used in all of these, the home page, the blog, and the article. It's at the top of all three of those. And then pages, this is kind of like one of the trickier things. So templates is like one type of page, the home page, the blog, the article, kind of like a layout, a particular type of.
Pages that could be reused.
A page is an actual instance of a template with like real content in it.
Right.
So like a blog might have. There's like a blog template and I don't know. You could have multiple article instances to show like different types of articles.
Of things that
yeah.
it's intended to like stamp out a type of page.
Right. So hopefully that's kind of making sense.
Right.
So basically you have atoms going to molecules, molecules going to organisms, organisms going to templates.
That kind of gets to the idea that if you look at just any web page out there, and you start seeing patterns in that page, like things that are being reused, styles that are being reused in many different places on the page. And so a pattern lab is I guess a kind of way where you can take a page like that and dissect it and be able to identify each individual reusable component that's on the page.
Yeah, so I remember going this was like 3 or 4 years ago. Emma Jane Westby gave a presentation at Drupal Camp Twin Cities that was like exactly about this, and it really kind of that was really something that opened my eyes. It was like a full day workshop, and we did this whole thing where we started at the page and we just worked through, okay, how do you look at this? How do you break this down into different chunks? And how do you break those chunks into different smaller chunks? And then you have a finite part of something that you can work on. This component-based theming, and it's really good, particularly if you have. It's good for a number of reasons. Number one, there's a lot of times where you might be able to reuse things, components in multiple contexts, and that's great. So code reuse is a good thing, but also it works really well when you're on a team. If you have a big giant website, maybe one person can implement it, but probably not, right? You probably have several people working on something. So if you have different people working on different components, you're going to have a lot less stepping on each other's feet. When you each have okay, I'm going to work on this, related posts thing. I'm going to get all the styles for that done. And then, okay, well, I'm working on the header here. Well, you're probably not going to have, you might have some patterns that overlap, but it helps as you're working in Git to have less conflicts with each other. And yeah, it's a good way to keep moving forward on the project. So, One thing I will say is, from my experience, well, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think you kind of need to be careful on the atoms side of things. It depends on the project that you're on. You might have one project where every time you have a list, things are going to look the same, right?
Right.
But a lot of times I've run into things where you're going to have multiple kinds of lists. You're going to have headings in a sidebar, headings on the main section. You're going to have a lot of different things where there's the same HTML elements. And I think you want to be cautious about directly styling those HTML elements,
Right.
because then you have to override those styles for your individual components, and you can get into specificity wars, and it becomes less pleasant.
Yeah. Sounds like a healthy dose of pragmatism
Yeah.
needs to be doled out here, and that you could run into trouble if you tried to make all the atoms first.
Yeah.
That
You
in thinking that, oh, I'll be reusing this later. Of course, I'll be reusing this new text field, which is different than that text field.
right. It is one of the challenges of pattern-based design is that, and I'm sure I'd find people who would disagree with me on this. Brad Frost might disagree with me on this. Patterns are very useful. When you're reusing molecules, smaller patterns, inside of larger ones, and you're using them in multiple different patterns, expecting that they're going to have the same styles in every location that you use them doesn't always work out that way. Because in my experience working with designers, there certainly can be designers that they're going to say, okay, every single time we have a byline, it's going to look exactly the same. Every time that we have this button, it's going to look exactly the same. But I find that if you have like multiple components, there are also designers, and I don't think they're wrong about this, who say, you know what, in this context, that doesn't look quite right. We need to change the line spacing. We need to change the font size. We need to change the padding on here because it just doesn't quite look that right. And when I first started working with this, I got really frustrated by that because I was like, we could make this markup a lot more streamlined. We could do less work if we made the patterns exactly the same every single place that they're using them. And I think, the more you can do that, it is helpful, but I don't think it's bad to make designs contextual and understand that we need to make this look good and communicate well, and sometimes something will look good one place and not look as good in the other place. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it sounds to me like it's a classical data architecture problem.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. It's like the difference between normalizing a database and denormalizing a database. That there at different times you want to do those different things. Sometimes for applications, it makes sense to not make sure that every data structure you're working with is finite and unique and all the fields are where they belong, but sometimes it makes sense to have some kind of giant data object that just has all the values you need to at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think it's true in a lot of different parts of programming where this comes up.
Over and over again.
Yeah. Do we
story just keeps repeating.
Do we come up with the ideal object-oriented structures where we have classes that perfectly encapsulate the abstract implementation and everything will exactly follow that, or do we run into, hey, there's a lot of special cases that we need to put in here and it's getting kind of thorny?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? So
right.
There's not always easy answers for this.
There's probably never one answer for all that.
Nope. Nothing's perfect, but I find this to be a useful tool.
Except Mark.
What about me?
That you're perfect.
I am not perfect. Um,
Why don't we talk
yeah,
about components in general?
components in general. Sure.
Um, because well, going back to the list, we wanted to play around with components. Um,
Yeah. Do you want to try to
part,
get this set up? Do we want to try it out, or do you feel like you've gotten a sense of how this works and it would?
I got a sense of how it works, but I don't have I mean, I got a sense of its anatomy, but I don't have a sense of how it works. Like, I don't know how one would like add a component to this.
Sure. Well, why don't we do that? All right.
I want a cat GIF component. Do we have a cat image component?
Uh, yes.
Are
All
there
right.
pictures of cats in the internet that we could use for something like this?
I don't know very much about cats,
Okay.
so I'm a dummy. I can't remember the clear command. What's the clear command?
Well, CLS or just clear?
Here. There we go.
Hmm.
All right. Just had a. I'm on air. It's very tense.
You'll
All
get the hang of it.
right. Okay. So I've got a empty directory, right?
Right. Nothing up your sleeve.
There is nothing here.
Ah,
So I
do
thought,
LSAL.
what? So I thought we'd try just installing this
Sounds good.
and seeing what kind of madness happens. So let's see.
Viewers of our first shows will be very grateful that you're the one that's executing these commands because they had to
Yeah.
suffer through a number of episodes of my very slow computer.
Okay. So let's see. Installing the PHP version of Pattern Lab.
That sounds right.
So the suggestion is to do to like git clone it. So I think that's fine, right?
Sure.
I'm okay with that. You know what?
You want to do it like in your test directory like that.
I'll clone it into the existing folder instead of
That's
nesting
cool.
it. Nesting it another level deep, right? Okay. Downloaded a zip file of this and done it that way too. But we're going to do this.
Cool.
All right. What's the next step here? So we're going to generate Pattern Lab for the first time. All right.
Wow,
All
literally
right.
double click the command.
Well, you could. I'm not going to do that.
Was
So,
this yet another thing that was optimized for Macs?
no, I don't think so. It's totally works from the command line. All right, so we're going to go to core scripts,
Cool.
and we have generate site command.
Exciting.
All right, well, all right. This is actually suggesting we do something else, so let's do that. So we're going to do PHP builder dot right.
Oh wow.
So
Took less than a
generated.
second.
Did not take that long. All right, so what's our next step here?
Probably try to navigate to it.
Yeah.
Now, we were reading through some kind of documentation, and they suggested like launching uh, a PHP web server. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
do
yep.
PHP-S
Right.
instead of
So,
oh, auto reload.
yeah, it's got auto reload, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is.
Um,
How to start the watch and auto reload.
yeah,
So if
I
you did that, would
feel
it like launch a local host?
Yeah, maybe it's under command line options, because I know there's a way to. Uh, where do I go? All right. Well, here's the actual files that got generated, right?
Cool. Looks like there's a
So
public there, and
there's
that's
a
got an
public.
index.
So let's just go to my local here. We're just going to go to local, and then we're going to I'm going to go to test pattern lab
Cool.
public.
Yep.
That's where the files go. Hey,
Look
look
at
at that.
Things.
Yeah, we got stuff there. All right, so there's that. So we could set it up to do watching, so that as we change things. So let's give a tour here. You probably don't want to look at the Git directory. There's some config stuff in here, some configuration options.
Could we also set up?
Yeah, there's some core stuff here that makes it work. I think that's the web server.
Mm.
And you know what? I think it's on like localhost. I don't know if I need to do something to trigger it. I thought it was at localhost 8080.
Trigger what?
The built-in web server. I know there's a way to use it. Yeah. Anyways, this is like probably super exciting to have me, mess around with that. So let's get to something more interesting. So really, like the things you care about are here's this public directory, right?
Right.
So this is when you generate pattern lab from your source files. This is the thing that you care about.
Do we edit the source files?
Yeah, you do.
In order to create new components, new patterns.
Right. So let's
start going about creating our cat GIF pattern.
Right.
Or component.
Right. So here's our source directory. Data. This is our source data. All that stuff that we saw on the page where there's data, it's all in JSON. And you can have lists of things. And JSON is fun to work with. I've done some fun things with this in some projects. But the thing you probably want to care about here right now is you want to have some patterns, right? There's some Sass stuff going on here. You can put fonts in there. There's an icon font, looks like. There's images, and there's some JavaScript. So there's jQuery and Modernizer and FitVids in there by default.
Cool.
And but the thing you probably care about the most is here's these patterns, right? So
yeah.
So you have atoms,
kind of pointing to these different
molecules,
folders. Is that
organisms.
How it works?
What?
Through configuration, it registers these folders as.
It's actually just from the file names themselves. So, so this number prefix, you can. So we called these atoms and molecules and organisms, right? That's what they're called outside by the default. But you could call them whatever you want. You could call them elements, and you could call them chunks. You could call them sections, like whatever you want. You can give them names. You can put in more levels than this. One thing I find is that you often have organisms that contain other organisms. It goes more than 3 levels deep. And so on one project I created a level called superorganisms. But you could call them.
Which are organisms for the capes.
Right. Or you could have organelles. You could have, I don't know. Yeah, organs. That might be like an intermediary step.
It's a little dark there, Mark.
Cells? No, I'm not like a prison cell. I'm like a cell in biology.
I get you.
Okay. Yeah, because we kind of go between like chemistry, physics, and biology.
And then
here.
templates. And then pages.
Yeah. It's a way to conceptualize this. You
It's a
can come up
living
with your
template.
own system, is my point. Like, you can rename these. And then if you want to have chunks, if you want to have groupings, you can do that. And you can go 2 levels deep, basically. So if you want to have, a grouping for global items for text, if you want to have different types of molecules, you can do that just by creating a folder. And again, you can control the order by putting numbers in there. And then within a folder, you can control the order that they appear in, again with numbers. So you don't have to like have a separate file that configures all the names. You just put the files in there, and it kind of organizes itself. So again, by default, Pattern Lab is using Mustache as the template format, which is a pretty common. Mustache is a pretty simple templating language. It doesn't have a lot of logic tools in there. Not that it's not logical; it's plenty logical, but it's and it doesn't look all that different from another templating language that I'm familiar with from Drupal 8 called Twig.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It has these double handlebars, so those are variables.
Looks very familiar.
Yeah, it's there's, like I said, there's not a lot of logic options in there. There's some things that you can do. And then probably like one thing to point out is that here's how you include one template inside of another one, right? So here's how you include an atom or a molecule. You have this arrow syntax.
So kind of out of the box, you're encouraged to know Mustache syntax.
Yeah, it's not that complicated.
Use it for your
but yes. And you can, by default, I think one of the tricky things in it is that you basically get one big giant JSON file that has all the data that you're going to need for all of your different patterns. You can also include JSON for just one particular pattern. You could have like 00-byline.json and have data for just that pattern. It gets a little bit funky though if then you're trying to view that byline pattern and it has its own data inside of an organism. Generally, you have to re-provide the data. Which it would...
Doesn't have a extensive system for inheriting data from...
Yeah, it's an area, and this is being worked on. I don't know the exact product roadmap for the roadmap, not necessarily product roadmap, but it's an open source project. There was one project I worked on where I made a different data source. I should have contributed this back. I'm a bad person for not doing that. But a different data source for each level, because I had a need to do that. Like I had a data.json for just all the organisms. So, anyways, so you want to know how to make a new pattern, huh?
A cat GIF.
All right, let's put that in the media category. So we're going to make a new thing.
Sure.
So we're going to do 01 cat GIF mustache.
If we want to get fancy, I found this.
I have to find which window you're in.
Yeah.
All right, let me see.
I'm in this Hangouts chat.
Yeah, no, I found it. All right, this is
a web component that displays a random cat.
Oh, you're going to try to get web components into this conversation, aren't you?
I did a web search for cat GIF component, and this was the second result that I found. Maybe it's because Google knows that I'm going to be searching for this
Uh,
GIF. But if you look at the anatomy of what this is, it's probably got uh, a .html file that describes the markup.
wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, just forget the core Ajax and just look at what's in the template there.
All right, I'm going to simplify this a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got an image here. And so, like, here's... So they have, like, a landscape. Let's see. So there's an atom. They have an images thing already, right, which has some different things. So the actual image itself, like, you actually want a cat GIF in there, huh? So, all right. All right. Oh wait. I'm gonna do cat dot mustache. All right, and I'm just going to. I'm gonna keep this simple. Isn't there like a website? I mean, honestly, that looks a little bit complicated for us to implement as our first thing.
Okay. I mean, it's just an image tag. It's
Random
got
cat. Nothing will be bad if I Google. Random.cat.
You could always search for cats and then reduce the.
All right, that's a good cat. Let's just put that. But you wanted a GIF. Random
Yeah.
active cat.
Toaster cat.
All right. Well, there is a cat API, because of course there is. All right. Let's just do this. This will be our random cat. All right. I think you should always have alt attributes, right?
Sure.
And I'm old school, so I'm gonna put a slash at the end of this, because that is how I roll.
XHTML.
Yeah, I've got reasons. All right, so first of all, I guess let's regenerate this.
So you do have to regenerate if you make a change.
Yeah, but let's set this up to watch for changes. That sounds like a good thing to do, right?
Sure. Why not?
All right, let's do this. All right. The server has been initialized. Not entirely sure what that means. Let's try that localhost 8080 again and see if that works. Oh. Test pattern lab public. No. All right. I'm not sure where that's showing up. So I'm not sure that this will auto-reload the page, but this will at least watch it and make changes, right? So if I reload this and I look into our images, hey, look at that. We got a random cat. I reload it. I've got a Roomba cat. That's great. All right, this is fantastic. All right, well, I'm making you happy, so that's good. All right, so now let's say that's fine. That is cool, but we want to have
be able to display it in a.
Yeah, we want to like just having
order.
the image itself is cool, but I want to have markup that makes this better for displaying this. So I'm going to do, a figure is a great option. So I'm going to call this is our cat GIF molecule, right? So, or maybe we call it rando cat. I don't know. And then we're going to include here our Adams cat. That sounds like a good thing to do. Maybe we'll put a class on here too. And we'll say rando cat image. So we're using the BEM syntax here, which is you have like a component object, and then you have like a child part of that is double underscore, and then here's the name of the actual element within inside that component. And we're going to say a very wonderful cat. Demonstrate like if we want to caption this. And I'm going to name that, I'm going to call that rando cat caption. Sound good? Does that look like a good component that we want to include? All right, so now we're going to reload this. And we're going to go to our media. And hey, look at that. We've got a random cat.
And a caption.
It's got a very wonderful cat, right? So that's nice. Well, what if we wanted to put some special styles for that? I mean, that's a pretty glorious cat right there. I think we can all agree, right? All right, so we have objects here. So we've got some, here's a Sass partial. These are all Sass partials, right? So we're going to call this randocat because that's the name of the object, right? I'm going to start by putting some I'm going to get a little bit fancy here, so
And the
what was it?
location
Image?
of the Sass file, is that controlled by configuration or convention?
Probably configuration.
Okay.
I think configuration.
So you specifically tell Pattern Labs that for this new component that you've made to look for this specific.
Yeah. So whoa. Oh my. All right. Well, that's a
very
thing.
fierce warning. Stop right there.
Yeah. So all right. So here's where we're going to tell it this. This is our main style CSS thing. So
okay.
I'm going to put in here some additional documentation, and I'm going to say we want to have our rando cat in here, right? So that the next time this gets compiled, look in this file. And I could write this out as rando cat image, but this saves a little bit of characters. This is a thing you can do in Sass.
Yeah.
This and thing basically says take the selector, and it's like a replacement thing. Use the selector where this and is, like the parent element. So the parent selector. So what do we want to have for styles? I think we want some padding on this, right? That's a given. So I'm going to say 2rem for the padding. And I think we need a background color. Code. Have one? All right, Lowell's going to pick it. Lowell, you have said nothing, so you get to pick a hex code. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
All right, pick a hex
Can we
code.
make the color Lowell?
Yeah,
Oh, they
give
could
me a
text into the numbers.
60C 999.
That's quite specific, Lowell. What?
Well, let's parse this out. So this is a little bit more green. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not going to try to calculate that in my head right now. So, what do we want to say about this image? Let's put a border on it.
Right.
Right? That seems like the thing to do. We're going to say border. We're going to say 0.1 rem dashed.
Double.
Double, you want double? All right. And then I'm going to reverse this because, that's a good thing to do. That will definitely come up with a good color. And then the caption, I want it to be bold. And I want the font size to be like 3 rem because that'll be nice and big. We want people to know about this. And I'm going to put some margin bottom up. I'm going to put like 1 rem of margin. All right, so I've put some styles in here, right? Let's see if this compiles just by reloading. It does not. So let's just check the documentation quick. Generating CSS. All right. Oh. All right, this could take a few seconds.
Bam.
All right. Wasn't that bad. That didn't work.
Pizza.
How do they have their SAS compilants set up? I don't know. Well, there's no like build process set up right
I
now.
don't see any task runner.
There's no task runner, so. All right, you are not going to look while I do this, right?
Of course not.
All right. Like I'd set this up with a build process and things if I was integrating this, but I don't want to like mess around with just figuring out SAS compiling and things right now because it doesn't sound super fun. So we're going to do randocat. Then I have to get rid of my fun SAS stuff. This is compiled CSS, right? Boop-a-doop-a-doop, boop, boop.
Magic.
All right. Now we're just gonna do that. I hope this doesn't like overwrite the CSS. I'm like worried that I did this wrong. Oh, it worked. Okay. There we go. Oh, that did work out nicely. Oh, great. I'm glad that got recorded. That's better.
Nice.
Okay.
So with pattern labs, we can quickly add components, and it's just a matter of creating a new file, putting some markup in, making sure it's named appropriately,
Yep.
and then making sure that the CSS for it is included with everything else.
Right. This is true. So, but going back to like the earlier part of the discussion, part of the challenge is how do you make this work with your living styles? Right?
Right, because, we made the change to pattern labs.
Yep.
We added a component to pattern labs, but
Right.
in order to get it into our project, we have to have some kind of way of getting all this
Yeah.
intelligence into the project.
So Chris, let me ask you this. Have you ever heard of a content management system called Drupal?
I happen to be a fan of that particular CMS.
What? You and me both? How did we get on this same... Oh, wait, this is called Drupal and Coffee, isn't it? Okay. All right. Gigs up. I like Drupal.
I did not know that.
I said the gig is up, but that's not really... Is it...
You can get free gigs from Google.
The
Don't worry about it.
The jig is up?
There you go.
I feel like I'm saying that's wrong.
It's late.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. All right, so so we want to try this out with our Drupal site, right?
So what is bringing up Drupal? Where are you headed?
Well, next week I'm going to New Orleans.
I mean, what does Drupal have to do with Pattern Labs?
Well, Drupal's where I'm running my. That's what I'm using for my site. Okay, so let's look at my website. It's
Sure.
super exciting.
Look at that site.
So this is my personal site. It's not super fancy, but I post things here from time to time, and we're on the local version of my website. So, so I have a theme for that because that's what we do in Drupal, right? We have themes. So, 1 second here. I'll move over PHP Storm. Ta-da! It's PHP Storm. You like
I happen to like
this?
that particular IDE.
You do. You do? All right. So this is my theme folder. This is Depot Liberty. That is the name of my theme that I made. So what do I have in here, right? I have some Sass. I have some JavaScript. I have, nope, I do not, nope, nope. Don't want to move this.
Escape.
So you may not know this, but there is a bug with PHP Storm where when you open things to move things, it causes the whole thing to crash, and then you have to restart.
I have never seen that ever.
Well, if I updated PHP Storm, maybe the bug would go away, but that seems complicated, honestly. So I'm opening it again. And hopefully I won't accidentally click on the wrong thing and have things happen. All right.
That's bad magic there.
There was some bad stuff going on. All right. Okay, so look at it. This PHP Storm is ready to update. We won't do that on this Hangout. All right, so to go back here, we have a custom theme, Depot Liberty.
And is it inheriting from Depot? Or Liberty?
It is inheriting from Liberty. Can I talk for 2 seconds about Liberty?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so this is my Drupal 8 theme. I've got it on Drupal.org. A project on Drupal.org. You can download it. So I set it up as like a good way to get started with your theme. So let me set up a different terminal window so we can take a look here and do some stuff. All right. So the thing that I think is kind of useful in this is this theme has a custom Drupal console command. You like Drupal console?
I happen to like that particular CLI.
I do too. It's a really neat tool. It's has a lot of similarities with Drush, but it's the sort of like the Drupal 8 thing, and there's some overlap between the two. You can use Drush with Drupal console. So if you do a command, it's a command line tool. So when you do a command, you start it with Drupal. You can generate stuff with them, And I wrote a custom command within this Liberty theme, generate a theme. So, do you want to pick a name for the theme? Lowell, you get to pick. Be nice.
We're doing this on the cat website?
Sure.
Sure, cat theme.
All right, we're going to call it catatonic.
Cats all the way down.
I said catatonic, so that's what it's going to be.
Fine.
You can't make me change it. All right, so we can enter a theme description.
Cats all the way down.
Cats all the way down. Yep, you get the... I don't want to generate theme breakpoints. This is not the most recent version of Liberty. The most recent version gives you another option, which I think is kind of cool. It lets you pick if you want to use grunt or gulp on your project.
Ooh.
Yeah. So right now, this version, it's using grunt. So what did that do? If we go back here and we take a look, we have a new theme, catatonic. Right? So it generated all the files we need. Drupal console has something that'll create your like .info YAML file and some other files, some of the basic files. But what the Liberty theme does is it sets up Sass for you. That's its main thing. It sets up Sass, and you can use grunt or gulp. And what I think is particularly useful is that it does like file renaming for you. So a lot of times when you have a Drupal theme, like a base theme, and a lot of times you use a sub-theme with it, and so there'll be like a starter kit folder. And it's your responsibility generally to copy that folder and then go through and rename everything. Like rename all the theme files. Or if you have theme functions, you have to rename those. And it gets kind of complicated pretty fast. Because if you make one mistake, then your theme is broken. And so this uses Drupal console to do all that file copying. And so there's like a folder in here that has like, here's all the template files that are used on them. One thing that I think is kind of neat is that some of these places where there's variables, like the info.yaml file, like some of the questions it asks you gets plugged into here. The actual like skeleton template file is a twig format. So you're using twig to generate. In theory, you could use twig to generate twig. I heard you like twig, so I put twig in your twig so you can twig while you twig. Right?
Thank you.
That was really twiggy.
Getting twiggy with it. All right. So, anyways, so like that's where my theme came from. Is that any questions on that on Liberty?
Not on Liberty, no.
All right. Yeah. So that is not the focus of our discussion. I just wanted to mention it because I think it's a fun tool that I hope people will find useful. Anyways, so this is my theme where I've actually started to build things out and stuff. So I've got CSS, I've got JavaScript. We saw those things in Pattern Lab, right?
Right.
Right. So the question is, well, how do we integrate that with Pattern Lab?
Right.
How do we make that work?
What level of integration are we looking at?
Yeah, right. So one thing that I think is kind of cool is Pattern Lab actually has a whole bunch of different repos. And there's basically different parts to it. It's kind of becoming more componentized. And there's sort of different versions. Like there's one version that runs on Node, for example. And look at what this says. I see the word twig in there. So I've been pretty excited about this. I like twig. I like it more than I like mustache as a templating language. And this popped up within the last month. There is a Drupal integration with Pattern Lab.
A standard integration.
Yeah, so there's some really cool people who are working to make it easier to integrate Pattern Lab with Drupal. And I think they're going to be talking about this at DrupalCon New Orleans, so I don't want to like steal their thunder about that.
Well, we've got one active viewer right now, so you'll be spoiling it for that one viewer.
Hello, viewer. I hope you're having a good time. Sorry if I'm scaring you right now. All right. So I don't know. I thought we'd try this out.
Yeah.
All right. So it uses Composer. Do you like Composer?
So it's saying do that from scratch, or is it saying do that inside your existing Drupal site?
Yeah, that's from scratch.
Yeah, but that's what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to set up a different branch for this.
Let's do a different branch. Why don't you put it in a different folder?
Well, we're going to do that, but
Great project command.
I should have done this beforehand. This is my previous things I hadn't committed. I feel like showing my dirty laundry here. All right, I'm going to set up a separate branch just because I don't know if this is going to work, so I don't want to like have to revert a bunch of things, right? So I'm going to do Pattern Lab Twig. All right, so it's using Composer, which is great because Composer is a way to standardized way to share PHP projects with each other and package them up and include dependencies and all that sort of fun things. So, yeah, it's great. So there is a it says to put a folder name here. So I'm just going to call it lab. A bad person. I have Xdebug enabled. I tried to turn it off, and I should know how to do that.
Yeah, it's like a one-liner.
So which of us gets to hum Jeopardy?
Nobody.
Well, we can draw lots.
By the time we're done drawing, it's going to be done.
We're going to pick something. I'm going to pick the Starter Kit Twig Drupal Minimal. Seems like a good thing to do. Starter Kit is already installed. Merge the new files with it or replace it. I'm going to replace it. Not sure if that's the right choice. Huzzah! It's been generated. All right, let's look what's going on here. Whoop, that was the wrong thing. Was I in the wrong? Oh, freak.
Where's lab? There it is.
Hey, did you like watching that? I thought it was fun. I was in the wrong folder. So that was cool. So let's do that again. Sorry about that. So here's your hot tip. Make sure you're in the right folder when you do this. All right. So now, see if this shows up. Now we have a lab folder. So now we have Pattern Lab, and it's inside of our theme. That's kind of neat, right?
Yep.
I think that's cool. So then the question is, like, how do we get our stuff from our theme?
How do you get the actual production page and the Pattern Lab to refer to the same CSS?
Right.
How do you break up the templates so that Pattern Lab consumes them?
Yep, that's the tricky part, right? So let's start with, if we look between here and here, we have a style thing, and we have global styles. So we're already using Grunt within our project here, and Grunt is really good at moving things around. And if you're using Gulp, you could do the same thing. So that's what I kind of want to do. I want to use Grunt to move some files around.
Oh, okay.
So
you got a
that
build step.
I want to build step so that I can do some compiling. So I am going to add in a few different npm packages to work with this.
Cool.
All right, so I'm going to do npm install grunt contrib copy. And what this will do then is I have a package.json file for my theme. You know what I should do before I do that? I should make a commit, shouldn't I? That would be the good thing to do in case anything goes terribly wrong. We've got these whole new things, right? So add pattern lab files to theme. Neat. So now we added also this contrib copy thing. I'm just going to take a quick look at what else I might need. I'm also going to need a thing called grunt shell. And that will let me run some shell commands so that I can regenerate pattern lab after I copy the files. And see what's in my package.json right now.
Lots of grunts.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Mark. I gotta be right back. Keep
Sure.
going now.
Okay. Let's commit this. Or pattern lab. How are you doing, Lowell?
I'm still with you.
Yeah? Have you done some stuff like this? Have you worked with some prototyping tools or style guides?
I've not integrated Pattern Lab. I've played with it before, but I've never integrated it.
Yeah. Okay.
But nice to see some people are doing that.
Yeah, and like this has been on my to-do list to actually talk about this. And I just haven't gotten around to talking about it. And there's lots of other people that are working on this sort of thing, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
So are you going to be mapping, like, Pattern Lab templates with Drupal templates?
I'm going to... well, we'll talk about that, I guess. Well, let's get to that when we get to that. Are you back, Chris?
And I'm back.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So let's so we got the things into our package.json so that those will if you were to run npm install, somebody else joins the project, all this stuff would get installed again, right? So we want contrib copy. We want grunt to make use of those in its grunt file. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new grunt task. Not front. If you Googled that, that would be an actual project on GitHub. So what we can do is we can make another task, and we'll put default as a dependency for that. So that means if you run grunt lab as a task, it'll do all of this stuff first, as well as any other things that we want to do. So we'll set this up like this so that we can, as we add in a couple more tasks, we can do that. All right, so what are the things that I want to do? I want to have a task called copy. So here's where we define all of our tasks, right? So I'm going to have a new task, and I'm going to call it copy. And I'm going to call this lab assets. And then down here, I guess I'm going to say we're going to do the copy lab. Right, and we're going to do some copying in there. And then we are also going to have another command called shell. And that task, pattern lab. So we're going to put that one in here too. Shell pattern lab. And then in that one, this is where we use the grunt shell thing, and we can have it run a command. So we're going to say cd lab that's going to be, so it's basically on the command line, it's going to do this behind the scenes. It's going to run that command that we kind of used before to generate the files, so it'll regenerate things based on source files. And
Great.
Yep. Sorry.
So this still seems like a build step. Like
It is a
we're
build
going
step.
to have separate repositories, one for the pattern lab and the other one for the site, and that we will have a command to like migrate and import and export this knowledge from one to each other.
Yep. Yeah, that is just exactly what's happening. But you could set this up within your build step. I'm setting this up as a separate task, but you could set this up as in your normal build step, so that when you're in your just normal process, this would get updated and stay up to date.
Build step itself would be a task.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same as what we're doing here.
Yeah. Right. So, all right. We want to copy over some files. Did something? What just happened?
I think we heard something from Lowell.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to copy over some files. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy from our CSS folder, right? We're going to copy CSS / global styles .css, And then we're going to set the destination of that to I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen when I do this, but I'm going to just set it to lab/source/style.css.
Well, the main thing we wanted to learn from seeing this is like how the communication would work from the Drupal theme to the pattern lab, and it seems like the answer is pretty clear. It's through this this task runner, which
Yeah, well, that's how I'm doing it. Somebody else could have another way of doing it, but this is how
would
I'm
it
doing it.
require a task runner? Could you literally have all the things that run the lab in your theme without a task runner?
So, one thing you could do is you could have your source folder here, right? You could have that for within your pattern lab folder, and you could point your libraries.yaml to, look inside lab/source/css, and you could do it that way too. That'd be another way to do this. Does that make sense? Like you could, instead of pointing up here within your theme root, you could do it down here. That would work. That'd be one other option for doing this.
Sure.
There's different ways to... I was going to say skin a cat, but we just had a cat gif, and that seems rude.
Oh, well, we've got about a half hour left.
I know. So let's show how this works, okay? So we're going to do grunt lab. Let's see if this works or if it blows up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I saw a typo.
Okay. Where?
Your source/style.
Oh, is it styles?
It's source CSS. And then style.
Yeah.
Right there on, yeah, there you go.
All right, there we go. All right, well, let's try running this again then. Let's see if it works.
Yeah, you seem to have a style.css folder that it generated the previous time.
All right, well,
oh, there it is.
Let's go like that because it's trying to move the entire. It's trying to move this entire source CSS global styles.css down here. So let's try it again. And let's see if that worked. It did. It moved that in there. Now this is a different file name, but so this is all of our styles here. That's
cool.
all the styles in my theme. So one of the things I need to do to make this work is I need to change the name of this here. So there's these meta things, which are like basically the top and the bottom of the document, which remain the same for everywhere. So I need to change that to global styles.css. You could customize this whole thing. And then let's see, am I really even using any? I'm not really even using any JavaScript. I'm old school. So we could do the same thing for JavaScript stuff. And one other thing that you can do is you can have a custom style guide CSS. So if you wanted to change the way Pattern Lab looks, you can create a special CSS file that you would push in here and replace this existing style guide CSS file, if that makes sense. Like if you wanted to make it purple instead
Right.
of black on top. You
Right.
could do that, basically. All right, so, aw, that's cute.
Hmm.
All right, so, all right, themes. Depot. And look at that. Now, this isn't going to look like a heck of a lot right now because we don't have, really, we don't have any templates in here. And this isn't matching up at all with the markup that's in my theme, right? So we would have to do that. So we need the markup to sync up as well. And that's where it gets tricky because Drupal's markup is kind of different than what the markup is for Pattern Lab. I just want to point out quick before I move on to that, I guess, that one of the cool things that the special Drupal pattern version of Pattern Lab does is, number one, it's using Twig for its template files, which is really neat. But the other thing is that they're implementing some of the custom Twig things that is working with Drupal so that you can potentially reuse your templates within Pattern Lab. So that would be one option, right? Is if you had a template, you could do the same thing. You could copy that into, you could pick some patterns and you could copy them over, and you could move them in there. For right now, let's I guess let's look at a component on my site, I guess. So what is something we want to try to implement?
Like a teaser.
Like the teaser, okay. Let's just do this byline.
Sounds good.
Let's see if we can just do this byline. All right, so because we kind of had an example of that in the other version, right? So we don't have to do the whole site, but let's just do this. So, so we're going to do 01 teaser byline. And yeah, sure, we'll add that to Git. Why not? And then we're going to look here. And all right, so what's in there? So we have t equals content x. And I guess we had a content. We got some divs around that. We have a div class equals content byline content. We'll put that inside of there. Let's not put the quick edit in there. So then we're going to say submitted by well, here's all kinds of fun RDF stuff. That's in there for quick
Maybe
edit.
we don't need for our intents and purposes.
Yeah, let's just do this, right, just to get same. So submitted by Marc Drummond. That makes me annoyed. I want to go change that at some point here, but so then I'll have a span, and so we could use Twig variables for this. We could go into data.json and we could let's see, is there an author name? So we could do, I think we can do this. So we can do, what is it? Name.first, and then name.last. And let's do day of week dot short. And then were there any other patterns in here? Okay. So there's month dot digit, and then dot long is what we want, and then we want year dot long. And then we have hour long and minute long, which is what you're thinking this is. This is really long, Mark. But that, then we're getting variables in there, which means like you could put multiple options in there, and I think there's some ways to randomize this maybe. All right, so we have that. So we have that pattern in there right now, right? So let's run our grunt task, and that'll recompile everything for us. Well, it would. You see any errors in my code here? Maybe I'll show you this without the variables. Oh, no, there it is, I think. I have a colon there instead of a dot.
Ooh.
Right. All right, so that worked. All right, so if I reload this, we have a teaser byline. And if you look at that, it's using the markup, and then it has the styles. Well, in theory, it should have the styles. Is it including? It should be including the styles up here. Oh, you know what? Maybe it's including it up above for the whole page. No. It's in an iframe, which has its own head. And there we go, right? So it is including the styles. If I look back at my Sass, do I actually have any styles for that? Maybe I should have picked something else.
Yes. Saw a byline there.
Okay. Oh, well, there's no content byline. Why? If I go back here, all right, that's why. Okay, I missed putting that into my pattern. So if I go back to the pattern, I can see that I need a footer class equals content. And we'll try this again. Hey, look at that. It's using the styles. We have the actual markup, and we have the styles that are getting applied here. You can see over there. Is Chris asleep? Did Chris fall asleep?
Not me sleeping. I guess we're going to go on for a little more than 2 hours, I guess.
Well, he missed out.
Well, keep talking.
Right.
Christopher. Can you hear me, Christopher? PHP Storm. Star Trek.
All right, Chris, Star Wars is better than Star Trek. Nothing.
Oh my God.
He is out.
Yes, it's awesome.
This is great. My
More
host is
coffee.
falling asleep on me.
More coffee.
This is, yeah, you're supposed to have coffee and Drupal, not just Drupal, Chris. All right, can we ping him?
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Mark, I think what I gathered from you watching you do this is that you're actually taking all the Drupal styles and putting and markup and putting them in Pattern Lab.
That's right. Yeah.
And I when I tried this a long time ago, I thought it was the other way around.
Well, you could do it the other way around.
Well, I mean, this makes more sense because when we set up a Drupal site, you basically already have markup, so you know what it is ahead of time.
Right.
And so get it into Pattern Lab, and then you can see in a structured place what it is you're going to be using.
Right. Exactly. So I think like a couple things you can probably see from working with this is that moving CSS and conceptually moving JavaScript into Pattern Lab is fairly straightforward to do with Grunt. That's not too bad. And getting Pattern Lab to reply.
Then the markup looks like it needs to have special file names.
Yeah, so that's the challenge is that this markup that I have here that I put into a basically like a markup partial, right? That's one nice neat file for all the markup for that particular component. But if we look back into Drupal to see where that is actually coming from, here's all my template files, right?
Right.
So that does not look like that. So if we look into my node html.twig file, hey, look what I found here.
Yeah, that's what I would like to try to map somehow.
Right. So it's in one file, but this is like one particular chunk of the page. And it would be nice if that matched up really nicely with this. If I had a one-to-one relationship, if I had one file that had this chunk of markup with this chunk of markup, which is a component, which is this whole thing we've kind of been talking about, right? About breaking things into chunks. It would be much easier to sync these up. Like you could set up some rules in Grunt to, you could structure your template files to, you could either manually declare where they all get moved, or you could structure the way that you organize your templates to match up with what Pattern Lab does. Which in Organized Pattern Lab so that it's sensible, like you have a sensible organization of your templates.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like you had a theme pre-designed to match the Pattern Lab structure, then you could conceptually map it.
Sort of, but the trouble is that, all right, this chunk of markup, right, this is inside of a big node template. It's not that big. But the same thing is true of a lot of other parts here. So I've got a branding block template, right? And this has this entire chunk of my page. But what if I wanted to have a molecule for just the name part of it, or the slogan part of it, or the logo part of it?
Right.
It's not really easy to do that the way that Drupal is set up, because Drupal is set up to have kind of... There's a lot of different ways to get markup in Drupal. A lot of them are related to the data structures of Drupal. So, like a node is a one piece of content. So you have one template for the whole thing. Then you have field templates for individual chunks of things inside of that. And that's kind of like a small component, but then you've got, like, this would include probably the image tag, right? And for a hero image.
So what's the syntax in Twig for? It's a block syntax. So with the block syntax, you could break these files apart and you can just keep breaking apart until you get into your atomic level.
Well, that would work if conceptually there was always, if things always mapped down where you had smaller pieces inside of smaller pieces.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to kind of move on to talk about is at MidCamp we had this big discussion. So MidCamp in Chicago, this was in mid-March, and we had a big discussion about how Drupal's templating system is kind of very tightly tied to data structures, which Drupal's really good at. We're really good at modeling content. But what we're not as good at is having our template system be more tied into how you think about breaking down a site's design into components. It's not component-based. It's like data-based. And so we had this whole big discussion. I've got a blog post up on marcdrummond.com that kind of talks about all the different sort of things that we talked about in relation to this. So it's a long post. And wouldn't it be great if Drupal's theming system was where you had like one template for one particular component, and you kind of had like a large component for the entire page, and then you broke it down into smaller sections, and then smaller sections, and then smaller sections, right? You had components nested within each other. And this is kind of the direction that I think front-end development is moving as a whole. React, the React, JavaScript library uses components. I think Angular and Ember are both moving to using components. It's a pretty common concept within the front-end world, but Drupal isn't really doing this. So it's a good direction to head. Right now there's been some kind of initial efforts to sort of work on this. John Albin created a module, and this is just coming out, where basically it allows you to create some custom twig file names that you could have components, and he does some things where he uses the Drupal templates to pass in data into these custom component templates, which is kind of what you were talking about, Lowell. You were talking about having like blocks or something.
Yeah,
So
includes to do the same thing. Yeah, that's what I really meant. Right.
yeah, so this is basically a way to do that. There's been, we won't get into all this, but there's been a lot of discussions about like JavaScript and Drupal, and so one of the efforts out there is Matt Davis is doing decoupled blocks, which lets you like include Angular or React or something in a block. And as part of that, they worked on a component API thing that would let you. I'm not sure entirely how it works, but basically it lets you do something kind of similar, I think, where you can register like component templates or something, and combine like markup and CSS and JavaScript all together. So I haven't read through this to see everything that it's doing. And then there's another like big Drupal core issue where Wim Leers came up with a proposal to do something similar to this in core, where you could use a module or a theme could define a component, and then it would have a YAML file with configuration. It would have a twig file, and that actually looks pretty similar. Lowell, have you worked with like panels much?
Yeah, a little bit.
Right. So panels, you can declare a layout.
Right. Yeah, the layout plugin.
Right, and so I was talking.
And that goes for Display Suite now as well.
Okay, cool.
They're both using the layout plugin module.
Yeah. So I was talking about this problem with Steve Persh at MidCamp, and he said like one technique he's used for a while is that with panels he will declare a layout plugin, and instead of it really being like a layout, like hey, here's a 2-column layout, it'll be here's a layout for a particular component, and like the region is instead like a variable source for a piece of data that goes into a template. And then the layout template is like the template for the entire component. And so this is kind of conceptually similar to that.
So he'll build his page in panels by placing all the different components in their locations.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And really, panels is a very similar model to kind of what we were talking about. Panels works more of a, you define the layout for the entire page. You can put together a mini panel that has several different pieces of things put together, like, and a pane is kind of like a component, right? So, and you can nest components inside of each other. That's very similar. So that's kind of the direction I'd love to see Drupal move into, because ideally, if we could get to that, then whether you're using Pattern Lab or you're using some other pattern library tool or style guide tool, you could actually get like one chunk of markup in a template, and it's just that chunk of markup. And then you could much more easily create a pattern library, a pattern lab that that demonstrates the actual markup for your site, because you could map the two. And maybe we could even build something like Pattern Lab within Drupal itself, or as a contributed module or something like that. Although I really like how Pattern Lab works, so I'm fine if we use Pattern Lab. But that's kind of what I wanted to build towards. I thought we would maybe try out some of these modules, like this component library, and like try making a twig file, but it's been 2 hours and Chris is asleep.
Yeah, we should play some video games for a while now.
So here's the question. Is he's in charge of this, right?
Yeah, this will go on
until he wakes up, essentially?
Yes.
I'm not going to yell because my daughter's in the room next door, so I don't want to wake her up.
Yeah.
If you want to yell, like
No,
to go for it.
I've got sleeping people here too. So we could play some games. Did you know that Google Chrome has a video game built into it?
Really? How do you do that? Oh,
I
is that
was
like for if you're waiting for something?
I had no internet connection, and it showed me, and it turned into a video game. If you can, like, I don't know how you would disconnect your internet, but
Well, I could do that, but then we wouldn't be talking anymore.
oh, that would be bad. Sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off.
No,
No,
that's
so
okay.
you know they show the dinosaur and the page not found, or there was no internet connection.
Okay. I
Well,
think maybe I've done this before.
Google uses the little dinosaur, but then
Yeah.
now it's a scrolling thing where you got to jump over your cactuses with your space bar.
That's cool.
Yeah, it freaked me out today when I saw that. It was so cool.
So tell me, Lowell, are you a Star Wars fan or a Star Trek fan?
Both.
But like, if you had to choose, you'd say
Trek
Star
Wars?
Wars, right?
Star Trek Wars?
But if you were to say which one was better, this is being recorded, so Chris is going to listen to this later. So I just want us to come to an agreement here that Star Wars is definitively better than Star Trek, right?
Yeah, I'll go with Star Trek.
No, you're going the wrong way, Lowell.
I
You're
know too
defending
much
Chris's
about-
honor in his absence.
I know too much about the George Lucas. Oh. Hey, here's an interesting thing about Star Wars.
Sure.
So the second trilogy
Yes.
was all about how the Emperor got too powerful and then took control of everything and then did a really bad job of it.
So by second chronologically or second in the order of which they were made?
In the order in which they were made.
Okay, all right. So the trilogy that shall not be named.
Yeah.
What we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's the way you want it. The bad trilogy.
Sure.
So, but that was what the premise was that the Overlord was too powerful and then ended up doing a bad job of taking care of everybody.
Yeah.
And that was the same story for the person producing the movies.
And you know what's funny is that I was going to try to find a clever way to say that Disney threw him down a chute.
They did the right thing.
They did.
Yeah. But the latest movie, I was so confused, or the next movie, the previews I've seen,
Yeah.
I'm so confused because it's so disconnected. There's no connections. I'm like, what is going on?
Oh, you haven't seen The Force Awakens?
I saw the last one, yeah.
What do you mean the next one? Oh, you mean Rogue One?
Well, there's this current trilogy, and we saw the
Right.
first one of it with
Right.
BB-8.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's another one coming out now.
Right. So the next one is Rogue One. So I guess this could be confusing. So we saw Episode 7, which was The Force Awakens, and then the next one of those is going to be not this year, but the following year. So it'll be in 2017.
Yeah.
What we get to see this year is they're kind of having sort of an anthology where they can have other movies, and this next one is called Rogue One, and is basically set before Episode 4, A New Hope.
Oh, this is
And-
not one of the trilogy.
No, it's not in the continuity.
Oh.
So it's about how the rebels got the plans for the Death Star.
Oh,
I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that.
it's a little filler thing.
I don't know if filler is the right word. It looks awesome. I mean, the latest trailer, I just got chills.
Cool.
I thought it looked really neat. I am very happy with what Disney is doing with Star Wars. And I will say, I mean, everybody can have their opinions, right? So I've liked the new Star Trek movies. They're enjoyable. But, like, the last one, I don't know. I thought they could have handled some of the things in that last Star Trek movie better.
Well,
But they're-
going back to Star Trek, I mean, you got
Yeah.
the whole TV series forever.
It's been gone for a while. I did hear that they're working on making a new TV series for Star Trek.
But there were so many old ones.
That doesn't mean they can't make a new one.
Well, that's good they make new ones.
Yeah.
I just think there's such a rich ecosystem of Star Treks that have been out there for so long
Yeah.
that Star Trek is just better.
I think we're very much in flame war territory with that.
Oh, he's awake.
Welcome back.
You were asleep for like 15 minutes.
Not 15 minutes.
Yes. We've been talking about Star Wars and Star Trek for like at least 10 minutes now. But probably 15. I finished up showing everything about 15 minutes ago.
I am sure you feel much better now.
Yeah, do you feel refreshed, Chris?
A little.
Do you want me to finish, like, do a quick recap of what I showed at the end here?
Yes.
All right.
No more code.
Well, let me just.
Both to sleep.
I don't. What part did you? What's the last thing you remembered?
We talked about components.
Right. But do you? What do you last remember, Chris?
Well, that we were going over the block templates.
The block templates.
We were breaking down into the separate components.
Okay. So let me just. So I guess I'll just take it a step back here. And so this is a refresher if you've been following along. You're like, what did they just talk about? Well, I'll show you. So I showed how we built up we put a pattern in the molecules for the byline. Here's all the code for the byline, right? And that's great. It's showing up here within Pattern Lab. And the styles are applying because we have the right classes, and the CSS is getting added within the iframe. Basically, these are all iframes. And the CSS is getting added up there. We're passing that in with grunt. And so we have so that's cool. The actual markup within our Drupal theme for this is in the node template. Like this particular chunk lives right here in a node template. So one of the challenges is that there's not a one-to-one relationship between Drupal templates and templates that are, one template for an entire component, for one chunk of the design. And we talked about how Drupal's templates tend to be based around data. Like the node is, one piece of content. A field is one tiny piece of that. We have a hero image thing. Inside of that, there's an image.
Data into templates.
Right. So they don't necessarily break down nicely. Drupal's template system doesn't necessarily break down nicely into component templates. And so that's kind of the challenge and this would be true, this is true of Pattern Lab, but it would be true really of any sort of style guide system, is that the way that Drupal's templates set up are not necessarily very conducive to a component-based approach. So there's been a lot of discussions about that. We had this big discussion at MidCamp about component-based theming and how we could move Drupal's theming system in that direction, like having one template per component, having larger components that contain smaller components, which is kind of similar to Panels, how Panels does things with a page layout and then a mini panel for a section and then individual panes within that. But in the meantime, there's been John Albin has this new module, component libraries, that lets you basically define a template, that's just a .twig template, and you can structure it however you want. He then basically, within a Drupal template, does an include statement and passes the variables from that Drupal template into his component template. And he's doing that in conjunction with KSS, which is another style guide system. So that's one.
Is he actually getting the KSS part working?
I think so. He's going to talk about it at DrupalCon. He's got a presentation on like 6 steps to front-end Wonderland or something like that.
That'll be exciting to see.
Yeah. Another effort out there is there's been all these different kind of experiments for how we can do more JavaScript things in core. And one of the efforts is called decoupled blocks. Matt Davis has been working on this. And this is something that Media Current, similar to something Media Current used for the weather company. And it's possible that people have done similar approaches on other projects. I know I was talking to some of my Lullabot coworkers, and they had done something similar to this on a project. But basically, putting integrating a front-end framework through the block system, so that you could have. Anyways, the point of that is not how the JavaScript framework stuff works. But the point is that they created like this other part called component API module, and that allows us a similar thing kind of to what John was doing, which is allowing you to define. This is kind of like a layout plugin where you can combine CSS and markup. This doesn't look super. I don't know. There's some documentation. Anyways. And then Wim Leers has a core issue where he's got a proposal for something like this. And a component would look kind of similar to a layout plugin for panels, where there's a .yaml file for some configuration, a template file, and some CSS.
Which are all different ways of asking how much support should the system provide in order to, so that the system knows about components, and that you can represent these components inside the system.
Yeah.
So that we can make the workflow of creating components, working through components, having like a component-driven development cycle.
Yeah.
And have the system.
Well, I think this is really important, personally. So if I were to pick one thing I'd like to see get into Drupal between now and, say, Drupal 9, like this is probably my top thing that I think would improve front-end development a lot, is some sort of component system because that would move Drupal theming in the direction, like that's the way that front-end development thinks about, a lot of front-end development thinks about how you implement a design for a site. So it makes sense from that perspective. I think it's also good from the perspective of a more, if you think about the page in chunks, right? Like the header chunk and a teaser chunk. You can think about chunks in the sidebar. I think that's a fairly site builder friendly approach as well. Like I think that's how people think of how you work with a website. I want to put this thing over here.
Assemble a page.
Right. This is how I put a page together. Is I want chunks of things, and that's kind of how our block system works. But currently, this is spread out across so many different systems within Drupal. You have views, which kind of creates component lists, sort of. Node queues and entity queues. Those kind of create custom lists of individual components. You have view modes for entities, which is kind of like a component. You have blocks, which can kind of be like a component. You have just a lot of different systems, and they're complex. And if I had to pick an overall vision, it would be we could really clean up the UX of Drupal by having further separation between how we structure content in Drupal and how we structure the appearance of Drupal is one thing. And then having this more component-based approach on both the front-end development side and on the UX side. And that ultimately ends up supporting, if we do want to have some more complex JavaScript in core, most of the current modern approaches to JavaScript are moving towards the direction of having components. I know you're a big fan, Chris, of web components.
Really?
Yeah, I think you've heard about that, where you have a custom HTML tag and it encapsulates markup and CSS and JavaScript, and it's scoped like that. That too is kind of along those lines. Like, this is sort of where the future of where front-end development is headed, and we made huge improvements in Drupal 8 to the theming system. I mean, I don't want to discount all that work by any means. Twig opens things up to a lot of people, and it makes it a lot easier to work with our theming system. We've cleaned up the markup. We've made it easy to have clean markup output from Drupal. And we should absolutely make use of all those new tools that we have available for us. I also would like us to move in a direction where we smooth the overall front-end development process and have a more sensible template structure. Because we could do some really cool things there. We could have a living style guide. We could, where you have
we'll have the opportunity at DrupalCon to talk about all those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good place to leave it tonight.
Yeah. So, if you are going to DrupalCon, there's some great training sessions on the Monday of DrupalCon, and you should absolutely go to those training sessions and the summits that are happening. If by chance you are not going to one of those things, if you want to more just talk with people, there is going to be kind of an informal gathering of front-end developers, and components is one of the things we might be talking about during that. And there's some really good sessions. There's a session about Pattern Lab and Twig integration with Drupal. I'm looking forward to that. There's a couple BOFs about living style guides. I mentioned John Albin has a session about some of the front-end development stuff that he's been working with. So
lots of information to follow upon, and lots of great opportunities for great conversation at DrupalCon. Come to Sprint Day, come to Training Day, come to meet up at the Front-End Developer Summit.
Yeah.
All those things. It's been a great show.
Yep.
Jokes aside, a lot of great things we went through tonight. I want to thank Marc Drummond for coming on the show tonight, and Lola, as always, thank you for hitting the streets.
Did Lola fall asleep now?
Maybe.
Thank you so much for both of you. I love the presentation.
I certainly regret staying up until about 2 last night.
Well, it's been really fun. Thanks for... I think this was fun. I had a good time. So, I think you want to go to sleep.
I very much am looking forward to that, yes.
I think you should do that. I think you'll feel better once you do.
I hope to see you guys next week.
Yeah. I'm excited. It's going to be super fun.
Partying with both you guys. New Orleans.
Yeah.
Woo!
Good night.
Yep. See ya.